Це перше.
Today is the 1st of March, the first day of our victorious sprint, and Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform continues this operation. My name is Vasyl and our guest is Vasyl Furman, Deputy Chairman of the Board of the National Bank of Ukraine, and we will talk about the condition of our banking system, about hryvnia, its rate, and so on and so forth. Good afternoon, Mr. Vasyl. Good afternoon. The only thing I would like to mention is I am the member of the board of the National Bank of Ukraine. Well, probably I will take the position as the deputy, but maybe a little bit later. Well, let's start with the banking system. What are the criteria or what are the markers that we may mention to assert that it's operating well? So what's going on with our banking system? Thank you for the question. You know, the year 2022 was passed by the banking system with dignity, so to say. We once again were convinced that the reforms we were undertaking in the banking system were correct, not only in the banking system but in the National Bank of Ukraine too. So the experience, the professionality that helped us to take the right decisions within the first days of war, now they proved their results. And the war did not influence the stability of the banking system, and the terror of the enemy was responded by the National Bank of Ukraine with implementation of power banking, and now more than 60 banks, which include more than 220 branches all across Ukraine, may operate under the conditions of blackout. Now the part of non-can operations grows in the national economy, and it accounts for 68% of all the transactions. Well, and talking about the last year 2022, the savings of individuals grew more than 18%, and mostly they were growing from June, and the savings of the businesses in hryvnia grew 18.9%, as well as the deposit rates. Within the fourth quarter of 2022, the premium grew 1.5%, and the rates for the new savings for both businesses and individuals grew to 10 and 10.5% respectively. The consumer loan rates amounted to 30%, and the integral rate was at the rate of the deposit certificates of the National Bank of Ukraine. Talking about the corporate portfolio of the banks, the hryvnia loans decreased, and it decreased 0.5% less in foreign currency and 2.5 in dollar equivalent. Within the fourth quarter of the last year, the currency lending fell 5.7%, and the tendency is decreasing from May, and we have to mention the role of lending under the state program 579 and other government programs. As of the 1st February, the banks approved the loans in amount of 169 billion hryvnias, and the portfolio of loans was 96 billion hryvnias. But I have to mention that talking about this year of the war, starting from the 24th February last year until 24th February this year, within this year, the banks extended more than 86 billion hryvnias aggregate to more than 20,000 businesses, 20,000 clients. And during this year, the government took the right decision to expand the program, and it will last for another year. And my personal opinion is that this program should be aimed mostly at the businesses who are export oriented, who create added value in our country, and the state has to solve the issue with repayment of the interest to the banks under this program. And in year 2022, this program should be relaunched so it's effective and it plays its efficient role in activization of lending. Well, talking about retail portfolio, it decreases. However, the banks renewed extending of mortgage loans, and the total amount of loans decreased more than 30%. The mortgage lending was resumed thanks to the government programs of accessible dwelling, accessible housing. In this segment, the banks extended 96% of new mortgage loans since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Again, my personal opinion is that any state program should provide for both economic and social effect. The banks now lend the consumers at very low rate. The first phase is 3% for certain categories of citizens. It's the social effect, and the economic effect is that it should be aimed first of all at the primary market, because the hryvnias invested in the primary market, they have the multiplier effect, which allows making 5-10 hryvnias more. If hryvnia is invested in secondary market, the effect is way less. So talking about government support, we have to pay a lot of attention to this multiplier effect, so it has a so to say multi-vector nature. Well, as to the non-performing loans, the share of NPLs grew 8.1% up to 38%, mostly in the loans extended to the individuals, and it was 4.5% in corporate portfolio. In year 2022, the assessment of portfolios will be focused on the non-performing loans and assessment of their credit risk. So in general, the 2022 was profitable for the banking system, and the banks made 24.7 billion hryvnias regardless of the allocation of funds to reserves. So in general, we see that the banking system maintains its financial defense. The year 2022 will not be easy. A lot will depend on the strategy of the banks, and in many banks we can hear that it's the year of new opportunities. However, many banks adhere to the conservative strategy because the war is not over and the risks are still pretty high. But we can say with no hesitation that the loans extended out beyond the government programs will be expensive. The government programs will be expanded, the lending will be expanded, but when the banks increase their rates, for example, for savings or for government issued securities, well, the national bank may influence the inflation or the cost of money in economy. That allows us to feel more strong, and I heavily rely on the 579 program and other government programs. Also, during the war, we should pay more attention to decentralization, and in terms of the banking system, we will be able to see shortly. The National Bank of Ukraine has to pass a set of tests with the bank in 2022, and the efficiency of the operation of the banking system will be influenced by the laws adopted by the Parliament of Ukraine, and I would like all those laws which are related to the lending, to the military rates, that all those laws are being adopted with the taking into account the opinion of the bankers, and obviously the position of the National Bank of Ukraine. And other factors include whether the war will end soon, how will we obtain the international financial aid, our cooperation with International Monetary Fund, and a number of other factors that will influence the operation of the banking system. I hope successfully influence it in a good way in 2023. So how do we provide the liquidity of the banks, and how do we reach the profitability of the banks during this time? Well, as to the liquidity of the banks, before the war, the banking system had profited. In simple words, it had high level of liquidity. A lot of resources were present in the system. It was one of the factors which resulted from successful reforms that we undertook before the war. And as to the profitability of the banking system, is the interest, income, and commissions which are being made by the banks. And the trust of the people to the banking system is pretty significant now, and the salaries paid to the people, like the military and in the social sphere and many others who work in the social sector, they don't, so those individuals, they don't withdraw the funds, they don't withdraw the cash, and it's still circulating in the banking system. And another resource is the terms. And talking about the savings of the individuals, they are on-demand savings, and such savings on demand that they still remains in the banking system. And now one of the tasks of the banking system is to increase those terms of circulating of those resources in the banking system, so that the banks could use those resources for lending both businesses and individuals, because provided the current conditions, the banks will have to increase the rates for lending, and it results in financial stability of the banking system and macroeconomic stability in general. Well, so another question is then about the rate. We have official rate of the currency rate of the National Bank of Ukraine, and there is a market rate, and sometimes it's the difference is 10%, and some might say that it gives some space for making some profit on it, and when this rate will be equalized. Well, look, 8% in fact, by the way. While you were asking your question, I've just counted it. The difference between the official rate implemented by the National Bank of Ukraine and the cash rate, which you can see in the points of exchange, is 8%. But within the last couple of weeks, the hryvnia rate was strengthened against US dollar, and it was influenced by a number of factors. The measures undertaken by the National Bank of Ukraine included the fact that the National Bank allowed placing savings in foreign currency for the individuals. So if this program works quite efficiently because it allows the population to pay money in hryvnia, which will be credited to their account in foreign currency at lower rate. Another is the activization of the agrarians who currently sell their foreign currency, which they made last year, to procure fertilizers and fuel and other resources for the spring sowing campaign. Another factor is the communication. People trust hryvnia. They see that the currency reserves of in the banking system and in the National Bank of Ukraine, they are sufficient. The professional actions of the National Bank of Ukraine, they deserve respect. And for example, International Monetary Fund is quite satisfied with the operation of the banking system, and according to the results of their monitoring of the programs of the International Monetary Fund, and now they develop a new program of cooperation. And it's very important because it's not it doesn't only mean cheap money, it means money from other investors from other countries, so that they see whether the country works with the IMF during the war, and if they do, it means that they can invest. And the director of IMF mentioned that during the war, Ukraine still manages to implement reforms, and it's real cool. And we will see those results in the programs of cooperation with IMF. And we have to undertake many more reforms on our way to European Union, and I hope we will not be only able to adopt those reforms, but to make them happen in real life. And the rate of hryvnia is influenced by the factor of war a lot. So from the very first day of the spring, I hope victorious spring, and the sooner we take over, the sooner we win, the better is for the banking system, for the macroeconomic stability. And the very significant factor which influences the stability of hryvnia is the external borrowings, because now we will have to finance 38 billions of budget expenses and we will have to rebuild the partly destroyed economic infrastructure of our state as well. Thank you very much. We have questions on the floor. Good afternoon, Tatiana Chula, Ukrinform. I will have two questions. You mentioned about the official rate of hryvnia, and is there any parcels for any preliminary conditions to change that fixed rate, and are there any conditions under which the National Bank of Ukraine may withdraw from the fixed rate to the floating rate? Well, during war the fixed rate has a lot more advantages than the floating rate, and we were using the policy of floating rate within the last 5 to 6 years, and the fact that we have this fixed rate at the moment results in currency stability and macroeconomic stability. And now we may say about this currency rate in a short-term perspective at least. So any policy related to the rate formation, like national bank interventions in the currency market, we understand that the fixed rate policy cannot be maintained for a long time because it will create disbalance in economy, and the currency market is not balanced at the moment. So we have to spend money for maintenance of the currency market, because we have to sell our currency reserves. But thanks to the international financial aid, we will be able to continue this policy. But in order to eliminate that disbalance, we have to have a number of conditions which would allow us to proceed to the floating rate policy, and the limitations in the currency market, they will be lifted gradually. So one of such conditions should be like the balance in the currency market. Like you remember, before the war, the export and import and the role of the national bank in the market was minimal. We were just softening the fluctuations. Well, remember, there was a time when there was a lot of dollars in the banking system, and then there was a situation with a huge demand, and the national bank had to sell the dollars from their reserves. As of today, we cannot say that the market is balanced. And another factor, for example, is the factor of war. We have to clearly understand that the factor of war influences significantly the expectations of the citizens. So does the rate of hryvnia and dollar influence the inflation? Obviously it does, and it's one of the factors that allows us to decrease the inflation targets. So there is a forecast that inflation will decrease this year, and it will be 18% this year. It's quite optimistic forecast. I hope we will be able to achieve this result this year, and hopefully it will decrease next year as well. So now National Bank of Ukraine continues the policy that was adhered to within the last year. So I trust the policy of the National Bank of Ukraine. I see its results, and I see that the vast majority of the people trust this policy as well. So it has more pluses today. And when we proceed to another policies, I think that the National Bank will communicate their policies to the population, because communication policy is very important. Communication policies forecast trust of the people to such policy for us is one of the top priorities, because during the last 8 years and even during the war, we see that more and more people trust the work and the policies of our central bank. Just a couple more details about the forecast for inflation forecast and forecast of the National Bank as to the pace of economic growth are the markers that market pays attention to. So what is the figure for economic growth? What is the figure for expected inflation, and how they can be, and by what they can be influenced? So the forecast for macroeconomic growth by the National Bank for this year, well, I would like to mention that any forecast has an element of indefinition, and the forecast may be corrected both optimistically and pessimistically, but the basic scenario is as follows. If the last year the inflation was 26.6%, for the next year it's the forecasted is 18.8, and for the 24 it's 10.4, and 25 it's 6.5%. It's an optimistic forecast for inflation. And another factor that positively influences our hryvnia is our currency reserves. The lesser reserves we have, the worse is for hryvnia. The more we have, the better for hryvnia. So for the year 2022, our currency reserves were 28.5 billion. For the 23, it's 35 billion. And for year 2024, it's $35.7 billion. They will be at stably high level or even growing. That will allow to allow us to maintain the stable rate of hryvnia. As to the growth of our GDP, we know that the GDP fell 30% last year, but we have to remember that in May or June there were forecasts from state institutions and international investors who forecasted the fall of GDP at the rate of 50%, but the real fall was 30%. Now the growth of economy is about 3%, so the forecast is being corrected once per quarter, and the more funds Ukraine will receive for reconstruction of our economy, for reconstruction of our destroyed and damaged housing, the more will the GDP growth. In years 2024 it's 4.1% and 6.4% in year 2025 is the basic forecast of the National Bank of Ukraine. And talking about these basic indicators, again, they may be corrected. The forecast is being given in the conditions of indefinition, I would like to say. So at this positive note, we will wrap up. We were talking about the policies of the National Bank of Ukraine, and our next briefing is in half an hour. Our guest will be Ambassador at Large with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, and we will talk about the food security and grain corridors. Thank you. See you shortly.